a driver who said something to me, and it's the first poem in chapter 6. Driving north. Driving north, moving forward. Time moving forward. Black road moving forward. Life moving forward. Tides moving in and out. Turn the truck south, moving forward. I like being quiet. I like the radio hum. I like heart silence, moving forward silently. The meditative, non-sound. The peaceful motion. The contained space, safety. The life I want. And then I open the door. Thanks. Yes, that was it.
Thanks, Jan. Very informative and entertaining as usual. But you still haven't told us the real reasons that motivated you going to the trucking sphere. I'm hoping the next part of the program is going to address those questions. I don't think you've really answered everything yet, or begun to. That was a very diplomatic response. Very good. All right, we'll go over to Q&A, and so people can ask Jan the sorts of questions that they want to.
Do we have a question from my friends and colleagues?
What's your next book?
My next book is called The Blue Door. It has 6 chapters, each chapter's a door. And the first one's called The Blue Door, and it's about my 23 years in the New South Wales Police. It's a memoir.
Could you tell me what inspired you to write this particular book on the trucking industry?
Yep. So a lot of my time in the police was spent in South Sydney, in Redfern, and my watering hole was a local establishment where for 15 years I became part of the local setting. Boundaries around how connected I became with what was going on. And there were truckies, wharfies, union people in there, and they became my friends. In particular, some of the men couldn't read and write particularly well, and I was completing my PhD, not recommended by your supervisor, sorry Ryan. University, I would be in the pub like writing chapter 1. And anyway, so I ended up writing letters and things for them, and they said, why aren't you writing about the industry, we're going broke. They just constantly said they were going broke, and why wasn't I writing about it? And these people were not included in my data collection.
Do you think that the truckies that have been those long-term speed users, would they be able to do the job without it?
No. They would need intervention. Dentists recognise them very quickly because they have a thing called truckie's mouth, and that's because they grind all the time with the use of amphetamine. They could do the work after some assistance dealing with the drug.
Could they do the distance and the time and behind the wheel?
Yes, well, certainly people who aren't using the drug are doing it, but I think there's been a culture of use, and these men are becoming antiquated and not keeping up. And of course, you do still have people being introduced to the drug culture.
Jan, you mentioned earlier that you're an independent researcher, it's not linked to TW or any other institutional stakeholder. Given that, you wrote a book that we've understood the motivation behind it, but would you like some of those statements? Could there be a flow-on for people who might read the book in terms of dictating any future policy direction?
Look, I think there is
changing culture in that workplace, because we're talking about workplace culture.
Yes,
You've gone in to assess their workplace culture and looked at the constraints and the issues affecting it. So surely, me as an individual reader who's not a politician or anything else might enjoy the book, but I can't influence any future developments that might occur beyond that.
So the question is, does the book...
Who did you want as an author to read the book?
I felt that there is a division between these men and workers generally, and policymakers. And the union came under criticism for saying there was a lot of drug use. you know, and it wasn't that there wasn't a lot of drug use, it was that there wasn't some answer provided. You know, no one in the industry that I talked to said there wasn't a problem. Nobody. So the book is self-serving, as in, as a retired police officer, I didn't know what to do with myself, and I happened to be bright and I like to write. And I self-paid, which means I went broke doing it. So that's the initial ego idiosyncratic. And it is weird. I mean, it's not the way books are written. You're supposed to get funding and apply to do it, and the book company says, yes, go and run off and do that and produce a piece of work. I sort of stuck my hand up. No one had to be interested. So it was more me wanting to work, them talking to me and me seeing a purpose and giving them a voice. Now, I have spoken to the National Transport Commission, who are very important in the industry, and told them I was bipartisan. But I'm sure they decided I was left-wing and had come from the union, which I hadn't. But at least they got information that I thought was important, and I would continue to do that, be fast. But these are closed institutions. I'm not in something, so I'm like this sort of bit of an oddball, which is why I try to dress politely and act politely and say, well, look, actually I'm not. I'm just an independent researcher, which is rather rare because people don't do it anymore.
Is it based on owner drivers or employees in those work?
It's owner drivers and drivers, although I would say there's more a weighting to owner drivers or small business operators. In fact, where the book was launched by Tamworth and Tony Windsor launched it, it was the biggest operation I'd been in.
Yeah, what were the key reforms that the industry should be making to have a safer and better workplace for these workers?
What reforms are needed now for a safer workplace?
Well, a better work life.
Better work life.
A safer and more secure work life for these people.
These people choose to drive trucks. No problem with that. If you choose to drive a truck, it comes with the territory that there are regulations you have to abide by, which they are. Safer, I'm hoping the remuneration tribunal will help with that considerably. I think that's really important, and that will be a review place, a place where things can actually be reviewed. I can't answer the question much more than that because of the very broadness of it, and get me on the road that would go on far too long.
That's okay.
But I think it's important for you to understand that last time I looked at the minimum wage that these men can be paid, which is called a modern award, 2013, modern. The amount is less than $750 per week. Now, I don't know what anyone's mortgage or rent payment is here at the moment, but take that out of your weekly wage, and then your power bill and your water bill and then everything else, you're in trouble. Now, I'm not saying they're earning that, that's the minimum amount. But when that award was introduced, I think they did something like averaged everyone's award wages and made it federal. And the New South Wales drivers award went down, and it is slowly being decreased to what is now the minimum wage. They were actually earning a little more under the award, but this is the very basic award. Yeah. So it's very complex once you start going into that, but obviously money is important. You know, if you look at $750, you take out a mortgage, power and water, and want to send your kids to school, you're in trouble before you start, let alone being an owner driver with all the overheads. Right.
And with regard to writing PhD,
Yes.
the good thing is that you do it anywhere that you can.
Yes.
So a pub is just as good as anywhere.
Thanks, Raylan.
A good deal of what you say about issues about emotions, family relationships, sexual experience and so forth is not too different from what you would find with other groups of workers in remote areas like mining workers or other branches of transport workers. I wondered what you see as distinctive about truckies particularly, and maybe what you learnt about their relationship with the trucks, with that distinctive technology, that thing which you evoke in the first poem.
Sure.
About the material reality of the truck itself.
I feel there's two elements to the question. One's about sex work and why is it different, why are workers' relationships different, particularly in the trucking industry in connection to the rural area. And the other, that first poem about the connection with the truck. I was in a truck yard recently, Kelly's up at Armidale, and He's got a lot of trucks, and they're new and they're brand fast. Anyway, I was standing next to him and I was talking to him about something, and I found myself doing this, to the truck. Patting it and rubbing it. It was his old yard truck that he hadn't sold, and I'm just giving it. And I think it's like that. I think that just becomes real. It's like it's a person. It's a real thing. It's a hideaway from everything else. It's a contained space, And I laugh now because I pat them like dogs. I'm like, oh, hello, and these men have been driving them for years. Sex work in rural areas, whether it's any different. The reason why that chapter there too is, and Raymond's outed the bit that I haven't declared in the book and I've avoided, is because of publicity and media, is because of the Aboriginal women. There was so much media written about the abuse of truck drivers to Aboriginal sex workers that I did do some research in that area and I haven't reported it in the book at all. The reason is because of I wrote a book on police corruption, that's the first. And the thing that I learned doing these sorts of difficult books is that if you give media or people who don't want to look any further than the beginning of something will make a big fuss about something that I consider very important, and that big fuss changes nothing. So I did not want to write at this point about Aboriginal sex workers in deprived poverty conditions having sex with truck drivers because it was too complex. Because I didn't find these men abusing these women in any of the ways that the task force of the New South Police was investigating on the back roads of, whatever. What I saw were people who were in need, who were working, who were exchanging money. Now, it's not that simple. It's a very complex topic and there's lots and lots of elements to it. But just those initial comments are what got me looking into those relationships. And I'll finish the answer to that question, which I haven't answered, because I think it's a project within itself, which I really would have liked to do. But it's long-term engagement again, and I would do it, but I'm not going to self-fund it. The men kept talking about, and I mean like men not talking to each other or knowing that they're talking to me, about a woman called the Pilliga Princess. And she just kept popping up. There was this woman called the Pilliga Princess. And it was the deep affection, and she's white, by the way, or the white community believes she's white. I'm not sure if the black community own her or who owned her, or maybe no one owned her, because she literally used to walk out of the desert onto the highway and do sex work and hitch rides, and they all knew her for ages. And she was hit by a truck. And they wanted to put a statue of the Pilliga Princess. They wanted a memorial to her, and the local council wouldn't do it, and blah, blah, blah. But it was that dialogue from separate men talking about this woman called the Pilliga Princess. And they would talk about she'd disappear, she'd be off the highway, and she'd be out in the bush, and the men would say, she's not out, she's gone away, And she wasn't a legend, she wasn't a mysterious figure, she was a real woman doing real sex work. And they had this deep abiding respect, and I wanted to record that as a symbol of how all those relationships can be like that. And I haven't, and I don't want you to think that I'm a Pollyanna and I don't have knowledge of lots of disgusting and dreadful things that happen. But the owner driver, I may as well have a bash back, talked about this sensational opinion that I had. This is very sensational. And the sensational opinion I had was actually one I went to with the Sex Workers Collective at Wattle Street, up here in Ultimo about 10 years ago, and said, why don't you give us sex packs? When I go out bush, I'll give them to the sex workers so we know that we're actually giving these women what they need. And I also said to them later on about, we could actually put them in trucks, and the drivers who are actually having sex with these women could say, these are from the collective. Well, it was all apparently not going to happen, and I think partly because I was a police officer, so it was a little out of left field. But the owner driver who I spoke to about it thought that was sensational, that men who are actually using women for sex might actually give them a safe sex pack. Apparently that's not possible. Like sensational. And what it actually is that puritanical separatist dialogue that we're getting in today's conversations, and yeah. I think that's it. Oh.
You
Oh, Transport Workers Union is here. I don't know. Oh, is it? Hello, please come up. Sorry, there you go. I said to you the TWU weren't. I didn't really, I just sort of mentioned that. But there was this independent officer, a researcher had popped up from nowhere and knocked on your door. Would you like to introduce him so you do a really nice job?
Oh, no. Michael Ed is the Assistant Secretary of the New South Wales branch of the TWU, and he's come along here tonight to support the launch of the book. Maybe not endorse some of the things I said about it.
Yeah, we'd like to.
I'll just briefly tell you about my background and introduction to the industry. I was studying at Newcastle University and working at Brambles on the waterfront in Carrington in Newcastle. So I was never a truck driver. I used to work on the wharf there as unskilled labour to get myself through university. And I was always a unionist. I was lucky enough for Steve at the time was Secretary of the Transport Workers Union in New South Wales and gave me a job. I was sent up to a place called Grafton on the north coast of New South Wales as a 25-year-old. It was, for me, I was the right of the Labor Party, or, you know, was fairly rational in my economic outlook. And I guess it was, to me, quite a radicalising experience to see how some markets operate and how the transport industry market operates, particularly as it relates to long-distance truck drivers. And I recall as a young 25-year-old representing a worker on the North Coast, his name was Barry, and he lived at Kempsey, and he had a couple of young girls, a couple of daughters. I have about 3 daughters myself. And Barry got sacked for working out of a company out of Lismore, and he missed a time slot by 2 hours, and he was sacked. He'd already driven about 80, 100 hours for the week. He was massively over hours, and he was sacked by Coles for missing a time slot by 2 hours. We ran an unfair dismissal, and the commissioner sort of said, well, you know, he's well in breach of your driving hours, you really want to make this go away. And he really settled the matter for, once he heard that from the commissioner, he was intimidated, he settled the matter for a few weeks' pay. Around 12 months later, I attended a coronial inquest where Barry had died, and he died again under pressure from companies at the top of the supply chain, the likes of Coles, and he was doing this thing which they call corners, where the truck in front, because there is a real brotherhood, it is overwhelming a brotherhood. There's some women drivers, but it's overwhelming male drivers on the road, and he told the driver in front that he was struggling and he was tired, so the driver in front would, on the CB, say all clear as they go around the corners. Jane's probably aware of this practice. So he was using both sides of the road because he was fatigued and eventually wasn't able to stay awake and drove off the road and died and left his his young girls to grow up without a father. But the point I wanted to make from that is that as Jan talked about, they're not Barry took drugs to do his job. He wasn't taking it for nightlife activities or nightclub activities, he was doing it to perform his work. I think that's a really outrageous situation. And I think what we've called for, and I think we've been pretty successful in doing so, but we've only seen the legislation put in place. I mean, we all know that legislation doesn't change practices at all, but with safe rates, we're really hopeful about trying to put in systems in place that will change some of the practices on the roads. One of the things we want to have is things like education and training, so truck drivers can have a voice, because actually talking to long distance drivers and trying to get them to act collectively is just physically very difficult. So if we can have education and training when they come into sites like Coles and actually hear their concerns, we can give them a voice, and things like hourly systems of remuneration rather than piecemeal rates, we think will transform the industry for owner drivers and employees. So we hope we're on the right way, but I think James raised an important issue in the book, and that is that the voices of long-distance truck drivers have not been adequately listened to. I think we've really struggled with that, to to be direct about it and making contact and trying to build some communities and, from our perspective, get long distance truck drivers through. Collectively, we've struggled with that, but there's no question that as a workforce they've been sweated. Some of their conditions have been atrocious, and it's members of the community that have paid for that as well. So I thank James for her work and for giving long distance drivers a voice.
I'm hoping that you'll have a drink and something to eat. And I've been directed that I have to go straight up the back and sign books in case people buy them so that people don't miss out. Thanks for coming. I've worked in Pakistan, believe it or not, and when people feel things that are very important, you will see these Muslim men do this. They speak with their hand on their heart, and that's what I'm doing. I'm saying my heart is saying thank you very much for coming.